welcome to another weekly update, the last one of the year, the last one of 2024. How's it going? Are you ready for 2025? Have you got all your resolutions ready to go? You fully planned? No, me neither. Good. I've sort of got some ideas and some things I want to do and some thoughts, but do, if you can, try and take the time just to be a bit introspective and pat yourself on the back of all the things that went well in 2024 and make some good plans for 2025. A couple of things to go through in this update, a couple of blog posts to talk through, and then I'm going to end with just a little bit of thinking about 2025 and just around AI and stuff like that. And the last blog post I'm going to reference kind of leads us nicely into that. But before I do that, so let's a very sort of developer-focused thing around how you store connection strings. Visual Studio is updating the default behavior for how it deals with connection strings and configurations. So there's a new blog post out, came out on Christmas Eve, around this kind of, you'll be familiar with this interface where you put in the connection string and the endpoint. They are now changing this. They've updated it, so they're taking the secrets out of the UX and from what they put into configuration completely. So by default, it's going to be integrated authentication, okay, meaning that the account keys won't be in there. And so your code will authenticate, using your login, your Azure CLI login or Visual Studio login, using integrated authentication rather than using connection strings. This is done by default. I think you can get out of it, but it's really interesting to see them flipping the default behavior, because the default behavior is huge, right? The default behavior is what most people will do if they don't know better. So this is good because it's that kind of carrot stick thing. It's that nudge theory thing. It forces people into a more secure configuration by changing the default behavior of what they're used to into doing it this way, making them go think about how to set up integrated authentication, how to do it properly. Doesn't mean you can't, go back to using connection strings. And if that's what you need to do for your particular scenario, that makes sense. But using managed identities is a better way of doing it. And it's good to see Visual Studio kind of not only change the defaults, but also putting all the stuff in place so that stuff should just happen seamlessly without you needing to know very much about what's going on, all the way from kind of local development, local testing, all the way up through publishing in Azure as well. It should handle all that stuff for you. So it's nice. It gets away from that problem of you accidentally checking in credentialed code into source code, and then it living kind of forever. Hopefully it makes the cycle, the CI/CD pipeline slightly easier as well, because you don't have to be changing those account keys all the time just for the different environments, because you can just, your users are different. So hopefully it should be better for everyone. It is going to be a bit of a learning curve, obviously, but yeah, definitely one to kind of be aware of. And that probably affects anybody doing any kind of development at the moment, because everything involves kind of connecting to third-party services, connecting to Azure services for publishing, or databases or anything else like that. So good to see that, and it'd be good to see what that looks like and good to try that. I mean, excited to kind of get the first project of 2025, the new one, first new project, and see how it works, and just get going with it. So that's cool. If you one less thing to figure out and sort out as well, of winding back the connection strings that you put in during development and then having to kind of change them up and do them as you're going into production and through those environments. So that's cool. All right, next thing. This is kind of like, probably wouldn't normally make the weekly update because it's not specifically around developing around Microsoft 365, but it is about developing, and it is something that comes up an awful lot. So I did want to, I'm kind of pleased it came up now because it means I can include it, and hopefully you've got a bit of downtime to read it as well. So this is a blog post by Phil Haack, who a million years ago, I think you worked at Microsoft, because I'm sure I remember including blog posts from Phil way back when. But he's always got interesting things to say. And his blog post, he's been blogging for a really long time as well. His blog post, this is really interesting I thought was interesting, is all around deserializing JSON and some of the challenges around deserializing JSON, specifically where you think you know what the JSON is, and then sometimes it comes in a completely different format, mostly around types and stuff like that. So he's got a really cool example where you've got this API that returns important equals true, false. Great. So you make a class around it that uses a Boolean because that makes sense. And then one day this comes up and breaks all your code. And so that's like a really classic thing where, you thought it was in one particular format, such as like a Boolean or something strongly typed like an integer or a Boolean or something like that based on what you saw. And then one day the structure kind of changes. You didn't know that was possible. And now it's a string and, craziness happens. And his solution to this problem, which he works through, which is kind of interesting, started off as an April Fool's joke from someone else. But interestingly, he's actually kind of implemented it because he thought it was quite a good idea, which is this kind of string or value of type T, which is kind of interesting especially around JSON, because strings are one of the things you can rely on with JSON eventually. So this is kind of an interesting implementation. It allows you to do some cool things, with a string or value. I quite like it actually. So it's worth a read. It's a different thing to think about, but it's one of those patterns that I'm not saying go out and change all your code for this pattern. I'm just saying be aware the pattern exists, and sometimes it might be the right thing to do. If you're wrangling with some sort of fairly gnarly JSON that keeps changing, this might be a nice way to kind of get around, because the alternative to that is what I sometimes do, and I know it's not great, is kind of treating everything as a string. And you don't really want to do that, especially if you're needing to work with the data, because it just makes things harder all the way down. So this is kind of nice, this kind of string or value thing. Depending on your use case, depending on what you're doing, you may find this is a good thing to do, and you may want to do it. So that's cool, worth checking out, worth having a look, and seeing what you think about it. So yep, that's that blog post. That's a nice one. And then finally, a blog post by Daniel Burrus, all around creativity in business, which is around AI. It's around the future of AI in business and this idea of creativity in business. And I was kind of thinking about this as it sort of relates to AI in 2025, what we can expect, and this kind of general shift we're seeing from generative AI, which I feel like we've got our heads around now. We know what it is, we know where it's useful, but we also know all the places it's not useful. And whilst it can be useful in some aspects of business, I think it's not a panacea. But we've seen this shift now to agentic capabilities, and maybe that will be something that aligns more to business. But I think Daniel's blog post is really interesting in calling out where creativity in business can be important, and the places where it's useful and why you'd want to have it. Some good examples around. So he uses Tesla's personalized driving experience. He uses the new AI Coca-Cola advert. It's interesting. He's got some good examples around how it's useful in things like creativity for marketing and product development. And I think it's useful. Generative AI as well is not less so creativity, I think, but generative AI is very useful in code generation as well. And we've definitely seen those benefits. So this is a really interesting blog post. It's worth a read through, I think. It's well thought through. And I like some of the things it's saying. And it ends with some stuff on general kind of AI, how it will change the landscape of work, how we can be prepared for that, and how we can kind of learn from business leaders. So it's definitely worth a read. His blog posts are always very informative. I think 2025 will be interesting for AI. I think we've seen 2024 was very much around mindshare and around being in front and around keeping up that pace of, if not innovation, certainly talking about your innovation. And so it's a very, very competitive landscape at the moment. And there's an awful fight, I think, amongst these big tech companies for mindshare. I think that's going to increase in 2025, but I think we're also going to see, I guess, I think consumers are going to push back a little bit on things being announced that are not there. We've seen this a little bit with Apple already. And I think that's going to get worse before it gets better. But I think that will probably impact Microsoft as well. And so I think the best thing they can do is concentrate on delivery and concentrate on talking about the things that users can do today and why they would do them. That's what I think. Love to know what you think. Let me know. I hope you have a fantastic 2025 going into it, and I will see you on the other side for the first weekly update of 25 next week.